Many on the autism spectrum are known for their interactional deficits in socialization and communication. Now, often these supposed deficits are simply different ways of expressing oneself or different modes of communication that are often atypical in style. 60 years have gone by and the literature goes on and on about different ways of recognizing what the hallmark behaviors of autism are, who is at risk, and how to improve the communication skills of someone afflicted with autism. But nobody knows the why. Why do people with autism have trouble with things like eye contact, communication response time, and attention span? Well, I'm here to tell you why. My why, at any rate. Hello friends, welcome to Mr. Snayl's Wild Ride. I am Mr. Snayl, and the wild ride is my life so far. You know, I have a hard enough time talking with groups of neurotypical people as it is. Typically, I just put on some kind of character. I mean, it's a version of myself, granted, but it's just a more NT-like version. Sometimes it's a little clown version or a cool guy version, whatever. So it's a version of myself, nevertheless. Now, I do much better one-on-one, but if it's groups of people that I'm comfortable with, or we're talking about a topic that I'm comfortable with, it's not as much of a big deal. But the trouble comes along when someone says something that seems to me to be either ambiguous or out of context or unusual, then I get really confused, and it doesn't take very much. Because the thing is, you know, I'm here looking at the trees really closely instead of the forest. I'm examining this tiny piece of bark, and everybody else is enjoying the vastness of the forest. And we all think that we're doing the same thing as everybody else in the group. So when this kind of confusion happens to me, it's just like the reverse of bullet time from the Matrix. From everybody else's perspective, I slow way down, but to me, time speeds up. It looks as though I'm just sitting there slack-jawed, not doing or moving or saying anything. Not responding to whatever the person said. But my mind is in overdrive trying to sort out thoughts and stimuli as fast as I can. Conversation and social interactions are intuitive for neurotypical people. They seem to happen automatically, and so they can be casual and relaxing. But people on the autism spectrum who can manage social interaction, they often have to do so intentionally. They have to rely on alternate methods to make it happen. These are usually cognitive ones. So the autistic person's CPU is working hard already, just being there. And now all of a sudden, in this confused state, multiple new, urgent, additional tasks are suddenly demanding all sorts of resources. Let's look at the human brain like an old-style single-core processor, you know, before hyperthreading. A single core can only process one task at a time. The human brain can only think one thought at a time. Sure, you can hold several ideas in memory and synthesize new ideas from those, but you can't think two things at the same time. Multitasking is when a computer switches between tasks very quickly, which gives the appearance that it's working on multiple things at the same time. I actually wrote a lengthy piece about this recently. I'll put a link in the description below if you want to read more about it. The computer brings all of its processing power to bear on each task. The question really is how many calculations it has to perform and how long those calculations take. Background processes take very little time because there are only a few calculations to make periodically. Now, complex apps like video editing software take a lot of time because there are many calculations and those are complex calculations. Human brains are not very good at multitasking. The more tasks we're trying to switch between, the worse we perform at all of them. Let's go back to my confused social situation when somebody said something to me that really threw me off. Now, this kind of thing happens to NTs all the time, where they'll be sitting around in a group talking and somebody will get confused or upset, but neurotypical people will just continue talking and eventually they'll work the thing out. Or maybe they'll get in a fist fight, but whatever. Now let's extend our computer analogy for the NTs. On average, there's really only a couple of main applications running when they're in a social situation. But for me, it's much more intense and stressful. From the start, there are already a lot of processor resources I've had to devote to monitoring my environment. And that's aside from the custom application suite for social management. Additionally, for people on the spectrum, there are several system functions that require a lot more resources than those same functions would for a neurotypical person. And many more background utilities come pre-installed on the autistic operating system. So like it or not, I'm really aware of things like the room temperature and how dry it is or how humid it is and what my extremities feel like in comparison to the room temperature. And of course, I'm monitoring my wife's comfort level. I ask how she's doing periodically and check in with her, but I don't want to ask too often and pester her and make the whole situation seem really kind of weird. I'm fidgety and clumsy at the same time, so that means that I move around a lot wherever I'm positioned in the room or among the people or on the couch or whatever. But I'm worried about my arms bumping into something, knocking a glass over, dropping a pillow, my head banging into a painting or framed piece of work that's behind the couch. But inevitably I'm monitoring the wrong limb, and the other one in the meantime I'm knocking over a drink or somebody else's drink or dropping something important or breaking something. Socks have been a problem my entire life. They're always too thick or too thin or falling down or not warm enough, and a lot of times the seam along the toe is either like rubbing the top of my big toe or bunched up under my little toe. I'm always very aware of the fabric of what I'm sitting on, if it's either like interestingly rough or really nice and smooth. I see lint and specks on everything, and it's a compulsion to try to pick it off even if it's inappropriate. I'm continuously agitated by my cuticles and my fingers and hangnails and things like that. I'm generally just kind of itchy all the time. And all of this is going on, and much, much more, all the time before anything unusual happens. So now, somebody said the unusual or ambiguous or out of context thing, and my system goes into overdrive, and a bunch of emergency applications are launched, and suddenly I'm trying to figure out a whole bunch of things at the same time. I wonder if I actually heard them correctly. I try to go back through my auditory recall and replay what it is that I heard and see if I can hear it differently. I wonder if they actually said what they meant. And depending on my relationship with the person, sometimes I can parse out what they really meant based on the words and the context and their mood. And I also wonder how literal they were. Or maybe they misspoke. All the while, I'm trying to figure out how much neurotypical world time has actually passed and where that line intersects with the room vibe. Of course, I become increasingly nervous as the time is racing by because I'm sitting there like an idiot with my mouth hanging open. And this doesn't even take into account if the person had asked me a question to which I have to now figure out the answer. Granted, everyone gets confused or tongue-tied once in a while, but hopefully you can understand that the difference here is one of scope. It's one that we can't control and we didn't choose. You know, I wear a lot of different hats here on my channel, and not every video has the same goal. My intention here today was to offer an opportunity, using myself as an example, to experience a little bit of what the autistic worldview is like, without a bunch of gimmicks like flashing lights and blindfolds and loud music and so on. Obviously, everybody's experience is unique to the individual, and that's just as true, if not more so, in the autism spectrum as it is anywhere else. I was just trying to illustrate what I see as a cultural difference, but trying to share a little bit of my culture with my viewers. I believe more information helps everybody, and the more information that's out there, then the better it is for everyone. So as you've watched this, I hope that if you are on the spectrum that you've been able to connect with some kernel of what I've said and find some truth for yourself in it. And for my neurotypical viewers, I hope that you've seen or understood something maybe a little differently or a little better, or maybe connected with something that was previously outside of your experience. It's like Amethyst says, if you want to learn about autism, ask an autistic. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. In case you want to read more about it. In case. Notorious for interactional deficits. That's just a fancy... Think of the human brain like a... I'll put a length into length. Multitasking is when the processor performs... I'll put a length... Damn it. Now, when they're... But hopefully you can understand the different... I wear a lot of hats. For me, socks have been a problem my whole life. They're either too tight or too loose, they fall down, my feet are either hot or cold, so they're either too thick or too thin. Oftentimes there's something trapped in my sock, and so there's like a grain of sand that's uncomfortable, or I don't like the color, or they're too stiff, or the seam along the toe is rubbing wrong, or especially the end of the seam gets caught under my little toe, or it's rubbing the top of my big toe.